Hello everyone, this is my presentation on the Republic of Malta, a former British Crown colony since 1814 and a member of the Commonwealth starting December 13th, 1964, after the Malta Independence Act. Eventually it became an independent republic in 1974. So, let's talk about geography. Malta, and you'll see why this is important as we go on, is right in the middle of the Mediterranean. The island experiences a lot of the typical Mediterranean climate, which is to say mild in general, maybe the occasional terrible storm or two, but lots of sun to make up for it. Also central to its character is the fact that it's an island nation, which means lots of sea access for obvious reasons. It's an island. Many trade opportunities, which they capitalize on today with tax policies that are favorable to foreign investment. Its greatest strengths are also its greatest weaknesses, however. Being an island nation, it makes everything expensive. Malta is not very resource rich and has to rely on imports for a lot of its goods. And to reiterate, it is in the middle of the Mediterranean. Being a tiny island nation in the middle of a large European body of water during 2 world wars did not make an easy time of it for poor Malta. My timeline starts in 1814. Now, Malta's been inhabited for a lot longer than that, about 8,000 years longer than that to be more specific. But in 1814, Malta came under formal control of the British Crown and became a British Crown colony. About 100 years later, World War I broke out, and the British, who have this weird habit of taking advantage of their colonies, some sort of pattern here, I don't know. They used Malta to its fullest extent as a place for soldiers to recuperate after being injured, and generally as a forward base of operations in the theater. Obviously, the Axis powers didn't like that in World War II. Directly after World War I, the 7 Giugno riot occurred. After some disgruntled Maltese outside the National Assembly meeting got increasingly rowdy until the British soldiers present to quell the crowd fired some unprovoked shots and killed 3 or 4, depending on your sources, Maltese men. Some of this stuff is starting to sound really familiar. Didn't they do this somewhere else? In 1921, the Amory-Milner Constitution gave control over local matters to the Maltese. They said purely local matters. The Maltese weren't really sure what that meant. But from 1930 to 39, there was a sort of interim where the Maltese were given a bit of home rule, and there was lots of argument over who was right about what, and all that lasted right up until there was another World War. Man, poor Malta. The British again used Malta in much the same way they did the first go-around, and Malta received a very warm expression of gratitude for their service from the Axis powers in the form of bombs. Lots of bombs, specifically from Italy. But the unbreakable Maltese spirit prevailed once again, and almost 20 years later, after being dragged through back-to-back global conflict, Malta gained independence and joined the Commonwealth in 1964. 10 years later, in 1974, Malta decided, hey Britain, you're cool and all, but we really need to do our own thing, and became the independent Republic of Malta. So, let's see. The 7 Giugno riot. In 1919, one Dr. F. Scerberas went to Valletta to advocate for some changes in the social and political situation of Malta. Thousands of people gathered outside a meeting of the National Assembly. The crowd consisted mainly of people upset about Malta's political status in relation to Britain, people left unemployed after the war, and followers of the exiled nationalist politician called Manuel Dimech. The crowd progressed quickly into a riot due to the shared anti-British sentiment of the gathered, and they began to tear down British flags and vandalize property held by those viewed to be sympathetic to British rule. At this point, a few British soldiers were sent to contain the riot, only to be taunted by the rioters until one of them panicked and fired shots into the crowd, which essentially galvanized the Maltese against British rule after 4 of the rioters were killed. This was exigence for half a century of advocacy for Maltese independence. So Malta's government loosely follows the British model due to their extended influence there. The legislature is a unicameral body called the House of Representatives. Members of the House are voted in through proportional representation. The leader of the majority party and head of the government is called the Prime Minister, just like in the British model. The judicial branch is led by the Constitutional Court, which practice judicial review on the nation's constitution. The members of which are selected by the President on the Prime Minister's advice, along with the rest of the judges of Malta are also selected that way, which essentially is just the prime minister making the choice and the president rubber stamping it, just like many other countries that we studied. The most recognizable faces in Maltese politics are those of the president, George Vela, and the prime minister, Roberto Vela. Again, these positions adhere essentially to the British model, with the president filling head of state role, occupied by the monarch in Great Britain, and the prime minister doing basically the same thing that prime ministers always do. So, as I've already covered, Malta is a tiny island nation. Despite that, physical stature, though, it has played quite a strategic role for many empires over the course of its history, from the Phoenicians to the French and the British. This long history of hosting different cultures had made it a bit of a melting pot, with a wide variety of cultural and linguistic phenomena being reflected in its own culture today. So I think Malta is different from any of the case studies we've covered so far because of its unique reaction to those many inhabitants over the years. So instead of being dominated by one prevailing culture, it essentially adopted little aspects of all the empires who had conquered it while retaining its individual character. I mean, they still have their own language, even though it's quite a mashup of many different aspects of Arabic and Italian and bits of French and some English. And that's reflected in its people's culture as well. They're quite a mashup. They're Roman Catholics who speak an Arabic-related language. It's very, very interesting. So, bit of a bonus fact, just because it's fun. I didn't put a picture on this slide because apparently the internet doesn't even know that this is a thing, and I also know that someone watching this probably hates bugs and would be thinking of some creative insults for me if I put an image up here. But Malta has a thriving street food culture centered around insects on the island. It was really strange for me to learn about this because I have a good friend from Malta, and one day she just described to me that she loves eating fried bugs, like scorpions, grasshoppers, all kinds of stuff. And I just wanted to add that because I don't know anybody else who knows of that unless they've talked to somebody who's lived there, so it's really interesting. I hope you enjoyed and learned something about this weird little island and the many facets of its lovely culture, even the bugs. Thank you.